So when you have transit systems, you have some vehicle, some cargo, some frame, some box that's going to carry a large number of people. And inevitably, the more people you have, the more weight the system has, and the more engine you need to move that weight. So different transit systems decide how they're going to create the propulsion. In the cable cars in San Francisco, you have the cable car, but there's no motor on the car. The motor is somewhere up the hill, and they're pulling a cable up. In the case of the BART train, they have strong electric motors, but the actual energy supply comes through the railroad tracks themselves. In the pneumatic system that we're talking about here, what they've decided is that the car itself is going to be stripped down to just the frame that supports the people, and instead the actual propulsion is going to come from some engine, some fan that's located someplace else on the hillside, and then all they're going to do is use that air compressed down the cylinder to push the pipe. The rationale behind that is just simply weight savings in the vehicle. You can get a very high acceleration, you can carry a lot of people, and the car itself should be quiet, ideally. I'm not sure how quiet the bearings were back in those days, but I can imagine that the system itself might have been fairly quiet. And then you had a very nice lightweight vehicle, and since really the vehicle itself, which is carrying the weight, is simplified by not having a drivetrain, motors, any kind of circuitry or power systems, that I can imagine the repairs. The vehicles themselves would be lightweight and to some degree probably disposable. The efficiency question really comes in about how tightly the system is sealed. I think you can understand that when you have a pipe much like a rifle, the bullet perfectly seals in the cylinder, and so all of the gases that are expanding in the case of a rifle are used to propel that bullet down the cylinder. In this case right here, having actual contact with the cylinder walls with the structure would create quite a bit of friction, but I can imagine that they would try to have as tight a seal as they could, really bringing the carriage to within a fairly close tolerance of the wall itself. I don't know about the suspension system, but usually you want some kind of suspension system to allow some level of comfort. Suspension systems would allow for some variability in the position, and of course, if you have a tight system, that variability could involve scuffing, so they have to decrease the size of the car to increase that room for error right there, but of course that decrease the decrease in size, which would then increase the gap around the side of the car, would decrease the overall efficiency, because that's a place where air can get past that. But nonetheless, it's an intriguing idea for moving people over a short distance and having a nice, quiet, safe, comfortable, light vehicle, which could be used nicely to transport a high volume of people over a short amount of time. So if the question is about the possibility of enlarging the system, then what I can imagine is that without changing the fan blades, the cars would get less and less responsive. So if you have the car a mile down the pipe, let's say, when they turn the fans on, then that long volume of air is going to act like a spring, for instance, and basically they'll turn the fans on, and then I can imagine minutes going by while that huge volume fills with pressure and then slowly starts to move the car. So the experience of the drivers is going to be reduced, or the passengers, I would say, because the cars are going to get slower and slower and less responsive, and really you'd have to scale up the fan system in the same way you scale up the length of the pipes. One of the interesting ideas coming on right now is the idea of a pneumatic system where we would have a buried rail, a buried cylinder underground. But what they're thinking about is a combination of creating a vacuum in the entire system so there's no air in there, and then using electromagnetic rails underneath there. So you would have a frictionless system which conceivably could reach speeds of 400 to 500 miles an hour. And from here to New York would just be reduced to 45 minutes. And wouldn't that be sweet, there is a possibility there, but of course there's lots of geology to figure out. But the idea is very interesting because there really is no speed limit. I mean, the car can just accelerate and accelerate and accelerate. And whereas modern high-speed rails still travel through air on above-ground tracks, they're limited to about 300 miles an hour just because the air friction becomes too great. But in an underground tunnel system with no air, there's really no limitation.